Leaders of the world's biggest economies continue their virtual meeting on Sunday with a focus on the environment. Saturday's G20 Summit was dominated by the coronavirus pandemic and the worst global recession in decades. Live now to our chief international correspondent, Lise Doucette, who's in Riyadh. Lise.
Yes, the gathering of the world's wealthiest nations, even they have been forced to go online by this powerful virus. And of course, their main focus, like everyone's these days, is on the health and wealth of our societies as this global pandemic continues to inflict consequences the world over. But there's also a growing call to not to forget, at a time when the wealthiest are gathering here, to not to forget about the poorest and the most vulnerable. We can go to Jaipur now to join the children's rights campaigner and Nobel laureate Kailash Satyarthi. Thank you very much for joining us this morning. And you've been campaigning for a fair share for the future. What is your message to G20 leaders here in Riyadh?
My message is very simple and clear, that the world has never faced a common enemy as we know, but our response to fight it out is to protect the rich and richest and ignore the most marginalized 20% people of the world. And this becomes only the crisis of justice and the crisis of morality if we are not able to protect our poorest children and the marginalized people. And that's why we are calling for a fair share. As we know that $8 trillion have been announced to protect rich people and industries by the wealthiest countries. But only 0.3% has been announced or has been earmarked for the most marginalized and needy children and people of the world out of this $8 trillion. And that is unacceptable. And that's why we are demanding that 20% of COVID-19 response fund must go to 20% most marginalized people of the world, and that is the fair share demand. And to immediate support, the G20 countries must announce a package for low-income countries so that their children can retain in schools, their children could be protected, and they should not fall into slavery, trafficking, and child labor, as we know that this is going to happen. All the reports come from the world prove that this child labor is a kind of pandemic which is increasing, and that should not be tolerated. We cannot afford to lose the entire generation of this kind of apathy and unjust behavior by the rich countries. So G20 must show their leadership. Yes, please.
Kailash Satyarthi, there has been the message from here repeatedly saying that no one is safe unless we are all safe. So the words are changing. Is the reality of the attention, that focus, beginning to shift?
Yes, we should be hopeful, of course, but it does not mean that only the richest and the wealthiest should be protected. If we are not able to protect the 20% most marginalized people, then we cannot protect peace. We cannot protect harmony in the world. We cannot protect sustainability. If we have to go back to attain slightest of the success in sustainable development goals, then we cannot ignore these 20% people. And that's why we are demanding the fair share, and at least $1 trillion should be earmarked for those marginalized people. And this demand is supported by 88 Nobel laureates and world leaders, including youth representatives, teachers' unions, parliamentary unions from all across the world in this demand for fair share for children.
And education will be on the agenda today here in Riyadh, and on the second day of this G20 summit. You see yourself on the streets of India, the streets of the countries you visit, how more and more children are not getting access to the education they so urgently need.
Absolutely. My organization, Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundation and Bachpan Bachao Andolan, has freed about 1,100 children who were trafficked during this pandemic time. And there was a common saga from each of those children that their parents are losing livelihoods, they are losing employment, and the children are being pushed into child labor, trafficking, and slavery. And they are forced to leave the schools, as we have seen in Ebola pandemic, which was tiny in comparison to the present situation. If 1 billion children are pushed out of school due to this situation, and almost half of them have no access or no proper access to online education. 385 million out of 1 billion school-going children were highly depending on school feeding programs or conditional cash transfer, and their parents don't have any social safety net, they don't have any bank account, and they are losing their livelihoods. So the worst sufferers are going to be these marginalized children. And I'm afraid that the success we have achieved so far in the last 20 years in decrease of child labor and slavery and trafficking would be reversed.
Yes.
So the world leaders, the G20 leaders have to show leadership.
I wish we had more time, but we wish you well in your such important work. Kailash Satyarthi joining us from Jaipur and emphasizing, telling G20 leaders, don't just think about the wealthy, think about those with the least wealth and the least prospects if they don't get an education.